Hi, my name is Cindy Rang with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington, and this is our 5th class in our row sampler. So today we're going to be doing the log cabin row, and we're going to talk about rapid strip piecing, we're going to talk about squaring up, and at the end I'm going to show you some other variations of the log cabin quilt and the log cabin row. We're going to show a pattern called timber, one called crackers, and one called star stepping. Log cabin quilts is kind of what started our whole shop. 25 years ago, well, more than that, 30 years ago, nurse friends of mine would come over to my house and that's what we would do. So kind of the gold standard book is this one by Eleanor Burns. I love this book. It's still in print after all of these years, and she shows you the rapid strip piecing. So when you get to the end of the video and end of my demonstration, if you feel like you need more of a written pattern, different from what we have provided you in your pattern, Eleanor's book is fantastic. She goes through it step by step, and then I think I showed you this in a previous class. She has all of these designs so that if you ever decide to make a log cabin quilt, she shows all of the variations, you know, so in terms of layout, which makes it kind of nice. So she really changed quilting with her rapid strip piecing. It makes a quilt come together super, super quickly. Last week we talked about chain piecing, and that's where you just butt pieces up together and you keep sewing. Rapid strip piecing is similar to that, except you put it on the top and you keep sewing. And again, I'll show you that. So let's talk about your pattern and your row. So for your row and your math, what you're going to do is you're going to start with a 2.5-inch center, and you'll have 2-inch strips. And we'll talk about that when I show you that. But you'll have 2 different lights and 2 different darks. And that's going to give you an 8.5-inch block, and you'll need 6 blocks to make your row 48.5 inches. Now, one thing that I've mentioned in each one of these classes is that if your row comes out an odd size, do not worry about it. We'll get to the end and I'll show you all kinds of things that you can do to make your rows fit properly, because what you'll see is everybody's will be totally different. So if you make extra blocks, if you make bigger blocks, if you make smaller blocks, it's really not going to matter. But the idea, if you follow this pattern, you're going to end up with an 8.5-inch by 48.5-inch row. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about cutting. All right, so we've talked about jelly rolls in the past, and jelly rolls are 2.5-inch strips. And they do have a funny little pinked edge on there because a machine cuts all of these perfectly for you. These are 2.5 inches. If you want to make your blocks that way for a log cabin quilt, you can. For our quilt, again, it's going to come out a little different size if you do that. So what we want you to do is cut 2-inch strips. And again, if you use your shape cut, you can just line this up on your edge, or in fact, line it up down on the bottom. We'll trim off our edge, and we're going to cut 2-inch strips. So I'm cutting on the 2, I'm cutting on the 4, and oops, bumped it, and I'm cutting on the 6. And I can keep going, and then what will happen is I have these perfectly cut strips. Let's go ahead and just look at a block really quick. So this is our center, and this is our first light. Comes around, you're going to sew your first light on a first time and a second time. And this is your first dark. You're going to sew that on your first time and your second time. Here's your second light, your first time and your second time, and your second dark, first row, second row. So you can see that in this block, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different darks, and we've got 4 different lights. You can do so many variations from this. You can go ahead and make this all one color and make this all one color. You can make this a color and this one a color. There are so many variations. You get to decide how you want your color to be. And we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew this in order. So we're going to start with our center, and it's going to be first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth piece that we're sewing on. all in a circle. These are the decisions that I've made for my block. I've decided that this is going to be my center. My light is going to be all one color, and my dark is going to be a mixture of these three. Okay, so I'm going to take my 2-inch strip. I'm going to lay it down with my right side up. I'm going to take my block. And people ask all the time, well, what about that little pinked edge if I'm using that? It doesn't matter. Just make it consistent. So if you feel like you're sewing from the edge of the pinked edge, which is what I like to do, just do that consistently each time. And again, everything is always 1/4 inch in quilting. So I've got my 1/4 inch foot on there, and I'm going to go ahead and sew to just off the edge. Last time we did chain piecing, which is where we butted everything up against. This time what we're doing is we are strip piecing, rapid strip piecing. So I'm going to lay that one on there, put that down, and I've given myself a little cutting room. That's what that is up there. So I'm going to go ahead and sew all 6 of these on. And I always like to stop with my needle in the down position to prevent anything from wiggling. Okay, that was our 6th piece that we just sewed on. Oh, dang it. And so we've got all of those sewn on. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut these apart. And what the whole idea of rapid strip piecing is that you are skipping some steps, I guess. And so I'm going to cut these apart right in the middle. And that leaves this funny little tail on there. And if you have kind of a large gap in there, if you want to kind of cut some of that out, you could if you want to. And of course, you always cut off your selvage. You don't want that to be in your quilt at all. Okay, so what we have then is we have our center block and our first light. So now what we're going to sew on is our second light, which of course in this case is exactly the same fabric. Now, what Eleanor has you do is she has you stack everything. The last color on is on the top with the seam towards you. So I'm going to stack that one, the seam is towards me, the last one on is on the top. So I'm going to stack all 6 of my blocks there. And then what's going to happen is, since all of my lights are the same color, I'm just going to pick up another one of these strips. You might go to a different color, or you might end up having, or you might end up with some different strips and some different colors. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to pick this up in the right upper corner, and I'm going to go ahead and lay this down. Now what's happened, let's look at this for just a second. What you can see is that, let's look at this up close. This is a nice straight edge. This clearly is not. And see how it kind of comes over the edge just a little bit? If this is a little too crazy for you, you certainly can go ahead and go to the iron. You can press this nice and open, and you can go ahead and take your rotary cutter and your ruler, and you can square that up. And I'll show you that in just a second if that's something that you need to do. For me, what I like about rapid strip piecing, is that I know that this is my straight edge, so I'm going to lay that down, and I've got this piece nice and straight, that piece is hanging there, and so this one, that's hanging over the edge just a little bit, but do you see where that's at? And so I can see through there a little bit, so my 1/4 inch foot is right on there, and I know that this piece is going to come out straight. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that down. I'm going to stop with my needle in the down position, and I'll do the next one. I'm going to go ahead and pick that up in the right upper corner, And as I lay that down, I can see that this is my straight edge. This one up here is not. Oh, I'm a little too close. Come down a little bit. And I'm lining up everything nice and straight, pressing that open, lift up my foot. And again, that's hanging off a little bit. So some of you guys that have been quilting for a while, you'll feel comfortable with this step. If you're relatively new to quilting, you might find that that is just a little too nuts for you. And if it is, but you can see how quick that's going to make it, right? And this is the whole idea. If you are making a log cabin quilt and you only have one day to make it, you truly can make a queen-sized quilt in one day using this technique. Again, you have to feel comfortable with this. This is why it's so fast, is because you're skipping some of those steps that we sort of think are pretty important. And one of them is pressing, and the other thing is squaring up those sides. So let me just show you. If you think that that's a little bit nuts, all you have to do is go over to the iron. Again, you know, press this open really good. I'm just going to finger press it for you so you can see. We're going to pretend that we ironed that. And then go ahead and take your ruler, lay your ruler down on top of there, and you can see there is my nice straight edge right there. There's my straight edge right there, and I'm going to take my rotary cutter and I'm just going to cut that off. Cut that off. And I can even do the other side if I'd like to. Same idea. And you're only making 6 blocks, so if you really are nervous about accuracy, it's only going to take you moments to go ahead and press those and trim those up. Because then what will happen is you'll be able to pick that up. Now, did you notice that I put it back down the way that it was? Because if I somehow get something mixed up when I'm cutting and I lay this block up this way, see how the others are, the last color on is on the top, and they're all in a certain order. If something gets turned, you'll end up with a log cabin block that's spinning the other way, and it throws everything off. So I always will just set it back down, pick it up in that right upper corner, so that when I lay it down, every block in front of every other block should all look exactly the same. Okay, so since I've trimmed that off, look at the difference that made. So I can go ahead and lay that right on my edge right there. I can go ahead and sew, and I don't have to worry about making sure that everything is staying straight while I'm sewing that down. So if you are nervous about accuracy, go ahead and press those, trim those off. The other thing too is sometimes people will trim them this way before they press them. They'll lay that down on top and they'll cut it that way. I tend not to do that because every once in a while it really was important for you to press that seam open. Otherwise, if you have something that kind of shoots in just a little bit, that could be what that was from. So I do press first. Lay everything on there. Cut that off. Okay, and again, the last color on is on the top, seam is towards me, picking it up in the right upper corner. And if you want to know a little bit more about this technique, Eleanor Burns's book is still available after all these years. I think it was originally published in like 1980. Okay, so I've got, here's my block, here's my first piece and my second piece. So what I'm going to do, just because I'm going to do rapid strip piecing, I'm going to go ahead and cut it with my scissors instead of my rotary cutter. Lay it down. The last color on is on the top and the seam is towards me. And I feel fairly comfortable with this because I would guess in the last 40 years of quilting, I have probably made between 60 and 70 log cabin quilts. It's just kind of a nice go-to quilt because it's just so quick. I don't know that I had to cut all that off. All right, so I'm going to lay it there. Now I have my center first light. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to a dark. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my dark strip. I'm going to do exactly the same thing. Pick this up in the right upper corner, lay this down, and again for me, I know that this piece down here, the second piece, is my nice straight edge. So I'm going to lay that up first. Lay that up there, hold everything flat. Put that down on top, that's kind of hanging over. And I'm going to sew that. The whole point of this row is to teach you rapid strip piecing. It's not everybody's favorite thing because it is a little nerve-wracking because you're breaking a few rules, but oh, that makes it kind of fun. So upper corner, I'm going to lay that down. This is my nice straight edge. Press that seam. And sew right over that. So I'm going to go ahead and keep going, and I'm going to get all of my first dark sewn on. Here is my block. I've got my first, second, and third one on. So this is my first time around with my dark. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these apart with my scissors. I'm just going to cut that part off. Last color on is on the top, and the seam is towards me. And I've just noticed that I am only making 5 blocks when in fact I'm supposed to make 6. So if you're counting with me, I'll add that other block. Okay. So now my next one on, I'm going to do same color, same exact thing. Pick it up in the right upper corner. My only straight edge is that center. So I'm going to lay that down. And see how this is nice and straight. This is straight here. And I've got my seam kind of open. And I'm eyeballing from here to here. And so I'm going to go ahead and sew that down. Keeping that straight. Pick up my next one. And again, if this part is a little too nerve-wracking for you, we can go ahead and go to the iron and trim these up. Okay, so here's my blocks, and so again, if you're just a little bit nervous about that, and if you don't like the results that you're getting, just press your blocks and square them up. Because we certainly know that the rules to quilting are that there's really only 3 things that you can get wrong, and that's if you don't cut properly, in terms of measuring properly, if you don't press properly, or if your seam allowance is off. If one of those 3 things are off, your block is not going to come out right. So that's why strip quilting can be particularly stressful, because it's not really exact when you are rapid strip piecing like that. So you can see that if I got off a little bit with a line and I started following something else, I could get kind of a nice wonky block. So instead, you can come over and trim these, and all you have to do is just open those up, and my next strip on is of course going to be right there. And it really just takes a second to go ahead and clean up that edge if you'd like to do that. So it's up to you. I would be interested to hear if you thought that rapid strip piecing was the worst thing you ever did or mind-blowing. What we liked about it was we liked that all of my nurse friends could come over. They would show up, we would have a quick breakfast, potluck lunch, and they were home for dinner with their finished quilt. So it is kind of fast, but this is nice because it gives you that nice straight edge. So we're going to go ahead and sew on our next row. So the most important thing, if you've decided to press these open and clean this edge off, you still want to make sure that you're picking something up properly. So you still would be picking up from this upper corner right here. So make sure that you're adding everything on there in the proper order. Just going to lay that down and see how that nice clean edge, it is going to make it a little bit easier. And you're still doing it quickly because the other thing about rapid strip piecing is that it's not just about not trimming and not pressing. The other thing is that we are going to go ahead and sew our piece on and then cut it. So it's not as if you're cheating if you decide to clean up that edge. You have an option. Oop. Oh, what did I do? I hit the button. Didn't even see myself do that. Okay. All right, so once again, here we are. We've now got our center, our first light, and our first dark. So center 1, 2, 3, 4. We've still got 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'm going to go ahead and sew on 2 more rows in exactly the same fashion, and then we'll be right back. So this is one of our blocks, and again, if you're doing the rapid strip piecing, you'll see that you've got weird, strange little things coming off all of the sides there. So it is important to go ahead and square up your block. So the easiest way to do that is to take your ruler and lay it down, and we're going to trim our blocks to 8.5 inches, but it's important to go ahead and line things up a little bit. So I always like to line up my center square, and then I can also look to make sure that this is lined up on the seam here, this is all lined up so that everything is nice and straight. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut, this side and the top. And then I'll turn it around and do the same thing. And I can really line up the edge there, but again, same thing is happening, and I can go ahead and see that everything is nice and straight there. So I'll trim up all of my blocks, and I always make sure that I've cut all the way through before I move everything. All right, so once you have all 6 of your blocks pressed and trimmed, they should all be 8.5 inches and look something like this. you can go ahead, if you are an experienced quilter, you can experiment with this a little bit. You can do smaller strips, you can do larger strips, you can do a variation of color. You can see this one is one that is also an 8.5 inch block, but I just did smaller strips so I could get just a little bit more color in there. So you can play around with this a little bit, and if you're making a full-sized log cabin quilt, make them any size you want. If you have a bunch of 2.5 inch strips, if you have some 3 inch strips, whatever you want, just make sure you have a light side and a dark side. And then when you're done, press your blocks, trim your blocks to a uniform size, and then go ahead and lay them out in a variety of patterns. So what you can do with this is you can go ahead and do a fields and furrows pattern that looks sort of like this. You can do mountains and valleys that look sort of like this. So lay everything out in a pattern that makes sense to you. Change them a couple different times. You can do whatever you'd like to do. It doesn't matter. Anyway, get them the way that you want. Don't play too much. And then as soon as you're done, go ahead and sew those together. And again, your block should end up being 8.5 inches by 48.5 inches long for your row sampler quilt. If it's not, don't do anything crazy. Don't rip anything out. Don't remake your row. Life will be good. And hopefully what you'll think about doing is making another log cabin quilt. We're going to go ahead and show you a couple variations of that. One is a quilt called Timber. This is my daughter Brianna's pattern. So we're going to hold the quilt up for you. And this is Brianna. And so what this is this is a humongous log cabin block. So what she did in the pattern, and you could probably go ahead and kind of figure this out and make this the way that you'd like to, but if you need all of the dimensions and the math, she tells you the size of your center block, which I think is a 12.5 inch square, and then she tells you the size of this one, the size of this one, size of this one, size of this one. The reason she made this block, this quilt, was because this particular quilt fabric it's not available. This was probably what, 4-5 years ago. It was called Alpine, and the owner of Moda, Mark Dunn, his daughter designed 3 different fabric lines, and this was, I think, her first one. But anyway, Brianna loved the fabric so much, she didn't want to cut it up. She just wanted great big pieces of it. And so, and let's hold up the bottom of it. So you can see it's just basically a great big huge log cabin block. So this one is called Timber. It's on our website, or it's a free download. Another one is called Star Stepping. This is one of my patterns, and let me just explain a star stepping block. Let me explain a courthouse steps block. So when we were talking about a log cabin and we were starting with, well, let's look at this one again. The center, and then it's first, second, third, fourth, and we're going around in a circle when we showed that. With the courthouse steps, what happens is you're going here, side, side, top, bottom, side, side, top, bottom. So if we look at one, you can see, or well, in this case, because of the way we're holding it, it's top, bottom, side, side. That one, then that one, then that one, then that one. And you're just going back and forth, and that's courthouse steps, still rapid strip piecing or strip piecing with pressing and trimming, but that block is essentially a log cabin block made basically the same idea, you're just sewing them on in a different order. But then what happens is you can end up having colors that will create this weird star. So let's go ahead and open this up. This is a really popular quilt because what you can do, this one is humongous, sorry, super huge. Well, maybe we don't have to show all of that border. Let's just show the center part. So what you can do, can you stretch out your top part?
Yes, I can.
So what you can do is, oh, can you hold the whole thing by yourself?
Well, you know, like this.
We'll be fast. So again, this fabric too, no longer available, but if you have kind of a fun panel that has some 6-inch blocks to it.
Yes, tell me.
or maybe you want to do some embroidery blocks or some photo blocks or whatever, you can put that there, and you just have to make this the right size so that this block is the same size as your courthouse steps block. And so you can see that this is a fun pattern that can be really different. There's another one hanging over here. We can just drop that. This one up here is maybe a little harder to see and easier to see in the shop than us taking it down, but it is also a star stepping. And for this one, we just did 4 blocks because we had some embroidered blocks in the center that we wanted to show. So again, you can see the different color options. And this one is yet another version. This is my pattern. It's called Crackers, and it's kind of a fun thing because there's one block right here that this one happens to be photo blocks, but you can put in something from a panel, you can put in a key piece of fabric if you want to. But what this is a half log cabin block. So the square is right here. And so what happens is we start with the center, 1 light, 1 dark, 1 light, 1 dark, 1 light, 1 dark, 1 light, 1 dark. So this is a half log cabin block. And again, the way that these are all laid out, that's what gives you what I think looks like crackers on a plate. So anyway, another option for another variation of the log cabin. If you have any questions about your pattern or your row or anything else you've seen today, be sure and email us or let us know. Otherwise, I'll see you in a week.